Joining us now, the man who coached the New Orleans Saints to a championship in Super Bowl 44, and some would say he's doing his best coaching job yet this year. He is Sean Payton. Sean, welcome back to the program. How are you?
I'm doing well, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, when you get the kind of praise you're getting this year for pushing the team to win after win after win after win, even without your starting quarterback, and people say it may be your best job yet, what's your reaction?
Well, look, sometimes, I mean, honestly, it's something that is really more a reflection of just the whole group here, the group of players in this locker room. I mean, our coaching staff. We started off the season with a win, then had a tough loss at Los Angeles, and Drew went down with the injury. And I think the best thing we did was we had planned to stay out west. So after the Ram game, we flew to Seattle and got in there late Sunday night, and we were there for a week in a hotel. And I think they're pivotal. I mean, they're games that you can look at that are turning point games, if you will, for a team. That was a big win for us on the road, Seattle. And the early stretch of that schedule was difficult, but guys kind of came together, and in Drew's absence, they kind of battled, and we were able to win. Teddy, to his credit, came in and each week played better and better. And so, look, to your question, it's such a team sport. And I understand the individual recognition that goes out to either players or coaches. And yet for me, I just feel like there's so many people here that contribute to the early start of this season. We got a lot of football ahead of us, but hopefully we can keep pushing and find a way to get in the postseason again.
How will that momentum that you developed while Drew was injured, how will that help down the stretch, if at all?
Well, look, I think confidence is funny. And I think that, and I've heard this said before, you can wish for it, you can think it, you can say you're going to be confident, but it's a result of demonstrated ability on the field. There's certain things you have to do then to say, hey, I'm confident I can do that again. I'm confident I can continue to do that. And I think during that stretch and even up till now, week in, week out, good teams, I think, gain confidence in their behavior on the field and the way they play.
I talked to Cam Jordan after one of your victories this year, and he credited the defensive performance to the fact that everyone, for the most part, has been together for 3 years now. And one of the key ingredients there, keeping defensive coordinator Dennis Allen, whose contract expired after the 2018 season. In hindsight, how important was that to the team to keep him around?
Yeah, I think very important. And back to the question you asked earlier, I mean, the efforts of Dennis and his staff and the guys on offense and Darren Rizzi and his group on defense, there's a lot of hours being put in. DA is someone that, I've known since 2006. He was on our original staff here. And listen, I don't think Dennis was going anywhere laterally as a defensive coordinator. Clearly, if he gets an opportunity, and I'm sure he will at some point, to be a head coach again, then you wish him well. But we're fortunate to have him. He's a tremendous teacher, a real good communicator, and a good friend.
Receiver Michael Thomas on pace to break the single-season reception record held by Marvin Harrison. What does he do best?
I would say his physicality at the release or at the top of routes, depending on how you choose to play him. If you're going to press him, boy, he's extremely physical at the line of scrimmage. And if you're going to play off, he's going to be explosive at the top end of routes. I think he has strong hands in traffic. Those would be just a few things, and his run after the catch ability is exceptional.
We talked earlier about the fact that even though it's a team sport, there are individual accolades. No receiver has ever been named NFL MVP. There's some discussion of him as a fringe candidate based on what he's doing, and also based on the fact that with Drew Brees out 5 games, it's hard for the quarterback to be in the MVP conversation. Make the case for Michael Thomas as a potential NFL MVP.
Well, look, it starts with you got to win. Here are the things we know. You got to be a winning team. You got to be generally speaking, having success, and he's been a huge part of that for us, then you have to have production, and he's on pace to have more production at that position than anyone in the history of the game. And then lastly, our Super Bowl champion just had the MVP at receiver, so there's no reason that can't happen relative to the length of the season.
The intensity and focus that I see from Michael Thomas, especially before games, I feel like he's been there long enough now that intensity, that passion, that drive, I get the impression it's spilling over to some of the other players. How much of what he brings to the game is infectious and does influence the guys who are new to your program?
Well, I think a lot. I think they see how he practices in the preparation. You know, he's probably his own worst critic by far. I mean, he can get hard on himself at practice, but every rep's so important to him. Starting from the beginning of the week walkthrough, he'll ask great questions, and all the way up to game time. And there's just a standard that he wants to play to and that he's comfortable with, and that's kind of how he plays too, with the chip on his shoulder.
When are you more nervous during a game, when you're up a score late or when you're down a score late?
I would say not during a game. It's generally the half an hour or an hour prior to the game. You're anxious. Once the game gets started, there's excitement, but you're kind of focused in the moment, and you've been going. Generally, at least for me, you know, the anxiety, the anticipation, all of that is pregame.
There's plenty of discussion about analytics and how that influences decisions that are made in the moment by the head coach. I talked earlier today to Tony Dungy about the decision on Thursday night by the Colts to go for it on 4th and 7. And we got into a broader talk about analytics. And I'm curious, Coach, how do you incorporate the percentages, the numbers, the statistics, the charts into the decisions you make during the heat of the moment, during the course of a game?
I think what's most important is understanding which ones you don't want to pay attention to. In other words, you have a lot of information, but what is it that you look at that means something substantial? Because different than baseball, you know, in our game, you might have an injury or your left tackle's having trouble blocking the defensive end. So the numbers compute to say, hey, you need to go for it here. But those aren't accounting for the injury at left tackle or the pressure your quarterback's having, or there's so many other factors rather than just an at-bat versus a pitcher, left-handed, right-handed. However, there are some things that are extremely important. And Ryan Herman in our department here each week will do several reports. We'll do a Keys to Victory analytics report separate from our regular Keys to Victory. In other words, outside the box thinking, here's what he would say relative to what he's seen from the opponent. So I think more importantly than anything, which specifically do we want to pay attention to and which ones do we want to ignore?
There's one specific aspect of analytics that has come into focus over the past couple of years. It applies when you're down by 14. Now, you're not often down by 14, so it's not relevant to you all that frequently. But the idea that when you're down 14, you score a touchdown, you go for 2 to cut it to 6 because the next touchdown plus a one-pointer puts you ahead. We've seen multiple coaches do that. Matt Patricia did it last week with the Lions. Do you have a standard rule that you would apply if you're down 14 and you score that touchdown to go for 1 or go for 2?
Well, wouldn't that be the same if you're down 7? Meaning, if we're paying attention to that stat line, and let's say you and I today are going to agree that we're going to do that, then when we're down 7 in score, aren't we going for 2? In other words, a lot of it has to depend on, do you feel like it's a higher scoring game or not? I mean, if I feel like my team's playing better, and then I might not put ourselves in that position for not making a 2-point play. I also think here's the one thing that I think a lot of times they fail to understand. You have a certain amount of plays you want to run from the 2 in. You might call them your 2-point play list. You might have 3 of them. Well, if you like them as 2-point plays and you're down on the 2 or the 3 yard line, are you going to call one of them in the first or second quarter for a touchdown? And you'd say yes. If you like that play a lot, then I might call that play in the second quarter. And so there are weeks where when you get to the fourth quarter, I feel like I can't wait to get to one of these plays, 2-point play or inside the 3-yard line. And there have been weeks where you've used a couple, and now so a lot goes into it. But to answer your question, I don't know why 14 is different than 7 or 21.
It's a good point, though, about the plays you have available, and that's something that I've made in the past. If you don't have a 2-point play you feel good about in that moment, that's a factor in whether or not you're going to go for 2. Whether you're down 7, whether you're down 14, whatever the gap is, you got to feel good about it. And you've already used your best 2-point play earlier in the game, then there it goes. And I think that gets overlooked when we get caught up in percentages and numbers. You got to feel good about the play you're going to call, or it makes no sense to call it.
Right, and look, we just finished going through this last night. Here's our tight red zone. Here are 2-point plays. But I guarantee you in the second quarter Sunday against Carolina, if we get down to the 2 or 3, I kind of know what play I want to call. And if I like it that much, well, I'm not going to wait and say I'm saving this for my fourth quarter 2-point play. I'm going to score 6 points with it if I can in the second quarter.
You mentioned Carolina. They've got running back Christian McCaffrey, who's having a great year. His skills are comparable to Alvin Kamara's. McCaffrey gets a lot more work. He gets a lot more touches, so he generates more yards, more touchdowns, more notoriety. How tempting is it for you, and how hard is it to resist the temptation to use Alvin Kamara in that same workhorse way that the Panthers use Christian McCaffrey?
Well, look, I think in credit Carolina and Ron, those guys have done a great job. He's having a fantastic year. And I would say this is the first year we've seen him in that true halfback, predominant running back 98% of the game, because he too has been a guy that has opened up and played in the empty sets and done a number of different things. A lot of it just has to do with how your game's unfolding. But for me, I think we've got 2 real good backs. Alvin's certainly someone that I feel is special and is really important to what we do. And there's going to be weeks where we lean on him heavier than others. But relative to the amount or the playing percentage, I think a lot of it is your long-term vision, durability, and having someone that's fresh and ready to carry the load. When Alvin got hurt this year, missed a few games, Latavius jumped in and was fantastic.
We're talking on a Friday morning. You're going to play 2 games within the next 6 days. How does the fact that you've got a short week coming up after the Carolina game affect in any way your preparations for Carolina?
Well, our preparations this week have been pretty standard. We played a game Sunday at Tampa, came back home, had our normal Monday routine, players off Tuesday, and then Wednesday began the work week. Where the routine switches a little is coming off the game Sunday. These guys will be down on Monday. We'll spend a lot of time in meetings and in walkthrough. We just played Atlanta 2 weeks ago, so coming up, or at least understanding the opponent will be helpful. But I think it becomes a little bit more of a mental prep test during that short week, and then trying to get these guys off their feet and recovered as quickly as possible.
I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about the replay review for pass interference, given your experience in January, given that you're on the competition committee. What's your assessment of where that protocol for reviewing pass interference calls and non-calls currently is, and what, if anything, do you think needs to be changed as we get deeper into the season and approach the playoffs?
Well, obviously, here we are 10 weeks in or whatnot, and clearly there's this bar that's higher than probably any of us anticipated. In other words, the standard for a play to be overturned is higher than certainly than I expected. And so we pay attention to it. That's how it's being called. We understand it, and then we go from there. From a standpoint of change, I think there are a dozen or so plays that we're going to look at and say, how was this not overturned? And so we just have to have the fortitude enough to say, hey, this wasn't the right call, and we're going to. And so I think that's a challenge for Al. It's a challenge for the New York when we go to New York. And quite honestly, I think the numbers looking at those plays from a consistency standpoint need to be. It's hard to be singular in that position. It's hard for one person. Last night when we meet on a phase of our game, there's going to be 4 or 5 voices that can have thoughts and opinions, and I think they can help you arrive at a better decision than quietly one person. And I think Al does a great job, and yet I think that number needs to be more of 3 or 5, where we're looking at it and we're taking in all the things that we've discussed. But clearly there's a standard right now, and we just have to pay attention to right now because that applies to everyone.
Right, but how does this complicate your decision in the heat of the moment when you got your hand on that red beanbag and you got to decide whether or not you're going to toss it onto the field, and you don't know what's going to happen because we don't know. I mean, I think it's fair to say we don't know where the line is. We don't know where it is south of Nickel Roby Coleman.
We know it's above our head. We know it's above our head. All right, so we know it's got to be clear. And then the other thing that happens last week at Tampa, there's a play interference. What's it look like upstairs? We don't have anything yet, Coach. What's it look like? They're going to the line of scrimmage, nothing. And so we don't always get a feed. You're hopeful that you get a feed, and so there's some gut, there's some instincts. But based on what I know today, Week 10, I know it's going to have to be pretty clear and obvious, or it's going to be as called on the field, and so. That's a high standard, and I think that if you feel like now that doesn't prevent. If I feel like there's been a pass interference or that wasn't interference, I'm throwing the challenge flag, and then I'm going to be pissed off if I wasn't right.
Hey, before I let you go, you've got the postseason looming, and I know you haven't gotten your berth yet, so this is a hypothetical. Assuming that you make it to the playoffs, will you approach the playoffs any differently given the way that the postseason ended for your team each of the last 2 years?
Man, we played well. I would not change my preparations for the postseason based on the play Diggs made in Minnesota. That would be madness. And then I think, I like the way this team's prepared. I like the way this team has been kind of fought through some adversity, and hopefully, fortunately, if we're able to get into that position, I think we'll have a plan on how we prepare for each game. But holy cow, that's the other thing. Back to the analytics. So often you make adjustments, and you got to make sure you're fixing the right part. That you're not just fixing a muffler and you got a tire problem.
Well, Coach, we wish you the best moving forward the rest of the season. We look forward to seeing you on NBC next Thursday night in Atlanta taking on the Falcons, and we look forward to also seeing you in the postseason this year. Congratulations on all your success this season, and we hope to talk to you again real soon.
Thanks a bunch, Mike. Appreciate you.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.